Okay, today's reading is Akutagawa Ryūnosuke's Jigokuhen. And we've already read one or two works by Akutagawa, so there's no need to go over his biography again. To review his biography, see the other study guide or the other videos that we've made, and or just look on Wikipedia. In the age of Wikipedia, there's no use really in talking about biography too much when we analyze text, and when you write your essays, there's absolutely no need to talk about it unless you have a point that's specifically relevant to the author's biography. Okay, so Jigokuhen, translated as Hell's Screen by the great translator J. Rubin. Okay, and the work is included in J. Rubin's translation of Akutagawa stories called Rashomon and 17 Other Stories, published by Penguin Classics in 2016. Okay, so let's jump right into the story and the study questions. There are 9 study questions in all. Answer each of these set of questions, really. Okay, number 1 is about the point of view. Identify the point of view, first person or third person. Who is the narrator? What is his relation to the setting? Relation to Lord of Horikawa, the other characters and events. How reliable is he? This is a very important question, underline it. How reliable is the narrator? Okay. Describe his narrative style and method, noting the difference between plot and story. Okay, so story is what actually happens. Plot is how he accounts or describes what happens, how he arranges what happens, right? There's an important distinction between plot and story that I discussed in one of the other videos, right, that the Russian formalists famously theorized. What are the narrator's sources? Okay, so what are the bases for the story he's telling? What sources does he rely on? Does he employ flashbacks or foreshadowing? If so, explain. And yes, he does. And what does he defend? Why does he defend the lordship so adamantly? Okay, so keep in mind that he's very close to the lordship. He defends him at all costs. He's very loyal to him. So that loyalty might affect his objectivity. Okay, so there are several questions to answer there for number 1. Number 2, create appropriate titles or subtitles for each of the 20 sections of the work. Okay, so the work can be divided into 20 sections. Give little short subtitles for each of them in order to make it easy for you to follow the narrator's argument and so forth. For example, section 13, I gave it the title Yuzuki's Near Rape. Section 14, Yoshihide's Final Request, and so forth. Number 3, discuss the setting and the era. Okay, can you find any anachronisms in the story? So Akutagawa Ryūnosuke is a modern writer, of course, born in the middle of the Meiji period, died in the second year of Shōwa period, of suicide, of course, in 1927. He killed himself with barbiturates. He's a modern writer, but he's set in many of his stories in the far distant past. Why does he do so? And keep in mind that he's a historian. Okay, he's very smart, but he's not a historian. He's not a scholar. So occasionally he includes anachronisms in his stories. Do you find any here? Is basically the question, after describing the setting and the era. Number 4, describe the Lord of Horikawa. Okay, so this is the other, or the major character of the work. Who is this guy? Who is his position, his reputation, his personality, his interest in Yuzuki, the main female character? Okay. How does he discover Yuzuki? Does he have ulterior motives in making her his junior lady-in-waiting? Why does he commission the hell painting and then decide to send Yuzuki to her death? Okay. Also discuss similarities between him and Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang Dynasty in China. Okay, and one of the first assignments for this class was to read Bai Zhouyi's The Song of Unending Sorrow, right? Changhenge, which is the long poem written in the Tang Dynasty about the love affair between Emperor Xuanzong and Yang Guifei, right? Which, as I mentioned in that video, forms the basis for much of Japanese culture and Japanese literature and so forth. And I think Akutagawa Ryūnosuke, of course, is familiar with that story, and I think he had it in the back of his mind as he wrote this story. Okay. Number 5. So yeah, discuss similarities between him and Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang Dynasty. Number 5, discuss the character Yoshihide, okay, the other major male character from the work. Discuss his appearance, his reputation, his worldview, his personality, his one tender side, quote unquote, right? He has one tender side. What is that? What is his aesthetic view, his painting method, and so forth, okay? What modern view of art does he represent? So the story takes place in the distant past. However, Yoshihide, I think it can be said that he is a representative of a certain type of modern aesthetics, right? Specifically, I'll give you the answer here, the Tambi Shugi, the aestheticist view, which I discussed in another video. Look it up if you've forgotten. Aestheticism, right? Akutagawa, Ryūnosuke, Tanizaki Junichiro, and other writers of the period were often classified into two camps, either the aestheticist or Tambi Shugi camp, or the Shizen Shugi, or naturalist camp, right? Akutagawa is usually associated with aestheticism, right? So how is this character in his work also a representative of the aestheticist camp, the aestheticist Tambi Shugi view of art? Give specific examples. Number 6. 6 has to do with the main female character in the work, Yuzuki. Describe her appearance, her personality, her various virtues, her feelings toward the lordship, and so forth. And then discuss the similarities between her and the famed Yang Guifei of the Tang Dynasty, which I just mentioned, right? There are obvious parallels between the two characters. Discuss those parallels, discuss any striking differences if you can find any. Number 7 is a continuation of that, basically. Discuss the similarities between this story by Akutagawa and the legend of Yang Guifei. Be specific, okay? So in order to answer this, you will want to reread Bai Zhouyi's Song of Unending Sorrow if necessary, and consult my previous study guide for reference. Be specific. Number 8. Describe the hell painting, the Jigokuhen, and the scene of the burning carriage. How is this painting different from previous examples of the genre, of the Jigokuhen genre? Right? How and why does Yoshihide's reaction to the burning carriage change in the course of the scene? Why does Yoshihide kill himself after it is completed? Explain. Okay? There's a lot to deal with in that question. Make sure you answer all of those to the extent possible. Number 9, the final question. Some critics have read this work in the I-novel mode. Alright? I-novel, underline that word. It's an important word in the context of modern Japanese literature. In Japanese, it's watashi shousetsu, right? It's, some say it's a translation of the German term Ich Roman, right? And this style, this sort of semi-autobiographical mode of fiction became popular in the late Meiji period and increased in popularity in the Taishō period and through the Shōwa period, and still exists today, right? A lot of writers still write in this sort of semi or half autobiographical mode. Okay, so some critics have read this work, even though it takes place, it's set in the distant past, right? They still read it as a kind of disguised I-novel, some critics, as a thinly disguised autobiography or self-portrait of Akutagawa himself, in which Yoshihide, the artist, corresponds to Akutagawa. So the question is, based on what you know of Akutagawa's life and his sort of orientation toward aestheticism, Tambiha, and diabolism, or Akumasugi, right? Do you think such a reading is valid? Yes or no? And explain. Alright. So that concludes the 9 questions for this week's reading. Akutagawa Ryūnosuke's Jigokuhen, published in 1918. So year 7 of the Taishō period, right? So Akutagawa still has 9 years to go before he kills himself in 1927. So this is usually regarded as his middle phase. His corpus is usually divided into 3 phases. This is his middle phase. The final phase is kind of when he starts to go mad and he writes these kind of hallucinatory weird, paranoid works, several of which we might read later in the semester. We'll get to that later. Okay, but this is from his middle period. Okay, if you have any questions about the work or about the study questions, send me an email. That is all. Goodbye.